Hello, everyone. Welcome to this edition of About Time with me, Chris Nichols. This is, as you know, the series where I get the chance to chat to leaders who I've either worked with or who in some way have interacted with me and I find inspiring or influential and where I want the world to know more about their work. And I'm delighted that today my guest is Damien Page, who's a Vice Chancellor from BNU. I'm going to let Damien say much more about himself in a moment. But first of all, Damien, just welcome. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Yeah, great. I mean, could you just say a few words to introduce yourself? I'm sure many people know you, but perhaps some people on this series won't know you at all.
Yeah, certainly. So, Damien Page, Vice Chancellor of Buckinghamshire New University. I've been in HE for, 18 years, 6 years in FE before that, and then a few years in advertising as soon as I graduated. So, yeah, bounced around the sector for a few years now.
Yeah, fantastic. And when did you actually become VC officially? And did you do an interim as well? Or...
No, so I was DVC here for 18 months, and then I started in February, so coming up to 6 months period, which is just the
Yeah.
to say it's gone fast is an understatement.
I can believe that. And that's when I first reached out to you because I thought, as many people who are listening to this know, I work as faculty on the TMP, which is a leadership program for university folks. And they'll be fascinated by the transition, how you move into the VC role and what it's like taking on the role, having been deputy. Um, I mean, if it's okay with you, could we start there? I mean, because you were deputy vice chancellor, you chose to go for VC. What drew you to it?
I mean, my motivation hasn't changed, in the last 20 odd years I've been in education. I didn't. When I went in, I was first generation to university, completely out of my depth when I went there. I had no one to draw on, no support, no stories, the kind of narratives that prepare you for those kind of things.
Yeah.
So I think when I graduated, nearly got thrown off a few times. My attendance was not the best. I was not a great student. Deadlines were frequently missed, which is ironic since where I am now. But I think when I left, and particularly when I went into FE. There, I that was probably the first time I started appreciating the opportunities I'd had. I mean, lots of my contemporaries, the friends I grew up with in my area, were in mainly manual work. Some were in prison, some had other destinations. So, the privilege of education, the transformative impact of it, I guess, really sunk in when I got to FE. So I was working 6 years at Lewisham College. It was a tough inner city college, but it was outstanding. Ofsted outstanding, yes, but the work we did there was just phenomenal. And I bought into the culture. I just loved it. There was worked far too many hours, as many people in education do, but it was time well spent.
Yeah.
So I think
Damien, can I ask? I mean, we will go on to the next part of your story, but I mean, just that in itself is brilliant. I mean, what made it so outstanding? What was great about it?
I think it was the sense that a lot of the young people who arrived there, they hadn't had great experiences in the secondary system. So they'd come through large proportion of black students from areas of deprivation, and as this is the picture nationally, their experience of secondary education hadn't been great. So we had a lot of students coming there, and this was a second chance. I mean, it's a cliche about FE being the second chance sector, but it is. I will always love FE for that. And to see the transformation of those students, and not just for themselves, but education is generational transformation. When they were coming here and we were getting them through, we were re-engaging them, getting them excited about learning and where their lives could go. And then to see them going on to university or other destinations, it was phenomenal to see. There's something visceral about that, being in the classroom, and I miss it now. I don't teach very much now at all. So I missed that, but just to see the impact it had, and I'm still in touch with a lot of my students from back then on Facebook, and you see how their lives have progressed. It was a privilege. So yeah, that was what really gave me a proper vocation in life, I think.
Right. Yeah. And how did you come to move from there into HE? Because there was a moment where you made a shift.
Yeah. So that was
Yeah.
I wanted to train teachers. So there was the job at
Ah.
University of Greenwich. So I went into teacher training for the post 16 sector. And again, that was a completely different type of education. Most of my students were vocational, so I was, out doing lots of teaching observations. We had I'd be observing carpentry lessons in the morning. I'd be in prisons observing a music lesson in the afternoon. That sheer variety where you can see all different types of learners, all different types of practice. That was great. Did that for a couple of
Yeah.
years. Took on head of department. Um, and then when I first went to Greenwich, I did my PhD, started PhD first week, and just love research.
Right.
Research was the thing I wanted to do, and I thought I'd work in research, be a prof, do that until I retire. But I took on a department that no one else wanted at the time. It was known to be a challenging department. There was some challenging individuals in there. The outcomes were poor. Financially, it wasn't sustainable. So I saw that as a challenge. I actually did it because I needed the money. It was the one thing. I was living in London at the time,
Mm.
about to become a father, and just needed more money. So I took it on for a while, and just fell in love with leadership. Because it was the same motivations. That has never changed, but you can just do it at a bigger scale. So instead of impacting the students who are in my class as head of department, you impact hundreds. Moved up to become dean of School of Education at Leeds Beckett, and then you're into the thousands. And so that's always been the same. It's scale. That's the only difference. The motivation is still the same. Still about educational transformation, and genuinely, but you can just do it at a bigger scale the more senior you are.
Yeah. Mm. And when did you first arrive at BNU?
So I was at Greenwich, then Leeds Beckett, then Wolverhampton. So yeah, about 2 years ago, I arrived at BNU, and it was
Right.
it's
Yeah.
my type of place anyway. The large proportion of our students first in family to university. So I've never wanted to work in high tariff universities. Widening participation is where my passion is.
Right.
So
Yeah.
the other thing I liked about the job, a lot of universities, larger universities, will have multiple DVC. So you'll have a DVC for education, DVC for research, etc. There was only one DVC at BNU, so it was across the whole spectrum. So it was research, it was teaching and learning. It was getting involved in bits of finance and professional services. That's what I really loved about the job.
Yeah.
And so doing that for a year and a half, I mean, I've gone for jobs where you don't really know what you're going into. I can think of one, for example, where the VC said, I said, look, I've been hearing these stories about your finances. Don't worry, Damien, finance is fine. No, Or I've been in it a month and then a 25 million deficit landed. So you never quite know. But with BNU, at least, I'd been on the ground. I knew the people, I knew the cultures, knew the systems, knew the practices. So I knew what I was going into. So being an internal candidate's not easy, though.
No.
It's always, it's always better to be an external candidate, I think.
Yeah. Well, do you know that for the folks on the TMP in particular, that's probably something worth thinking about. I mean, uh, it, I've never been an internal candidate in the same way for this kind of role. So, what? Yeah, what lies behind that? It's harder to be an internal candidate.
I think
Yeah.
the whole process was long. I mean, it took about 5 months
Right.
between
Yeah.
um, a point, advertising and then going through all the various stages. And it was a rigorous process. I think it's the constant, people are constantly asking, oh, are you ready? How do you think it's going? Oh, I heard this. And the rumor mill just spirals, so you hear
Ah.
all sorts of things. And politics, institutional politics has a part to play. Some people want you to get the job. Some people definitely don't want you to get the job. So it was harder from that regard. It's much cleaner if you're an external candidate. You don't really know the people. You have some informal conversations, but you haven't got that day in day out kind of presence of it, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Um, yeah, I hadn't thought of that. So does that mean like your classic first 100 days is like a very different first 100 days if you arrive internally?
Yeah, because I already knew what needed to be done. I had a really concrete plan. If you're an external candidate, you have to spend a few months getting to know people. You have to sit with people. You have to be proximal, and learn about the place. Because I already knew the place, we hit the ground running. So the first 100 days, within a week, we started structural change. Went from 9 schools to 3 colleges, and it was been the most smooth transition and restructure I've ever been involved in, because we knew the place. I'd listened to people. I'd spent hours doing these back to the floor meetings, so I knew what needed to be done. You're never entirely prepared, and there's always things you don't know. Even you think you know a place until you actually become vice chancellor, and then you realise where your blind spots were.
Yeah. So was like applying for the job, was your what needs to change vision like a large part of what you went in on for the interview?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it was mainly council on the panel, so our governing body. A lot of those were involved, but students, colleagues, and there's no, because they know you. They knew what I'd achieved as DVC. They'd seen how the outcomes had increased. They knew the way I work, my approach to work, and it's not for everyone. My approach, and I'm certainly more outspoken than a lot of senior leaders. That's not for everyone. But at least they knew if they're going to offer me a job, they knew what they were going to get. I set out very clearly the plans and what I'd want to implement, and we were able to move very quickly with support from council and across the organisation.
And that sets me thinking about lots of different strands that folks are going to find really interesting. So, yeah. And I think I'd quite like to start with just so if you were to say what kind of leader you are, I mean, how would you describe yourself as a leader?
I think above all, I'm a pragmatist.
Yeah.
Certainly as I've got older, I've become less. I'm not sure I've become less idealistic. I think I've just managed to temper it more with practical solutions to idealism. I don't think the senior leaders should ever stop being idealistic. But if you are purely an idealist and you want things, you're trying for the perfect solution, you become disillusioned. And I've seen it happen to many colleagues over the years. So you've got to be a pragmatist.
Yeah.
You've got the old model of situational leadership, and it's a kind of truism. You should change your approach depending on the situation, not just internally, but the external context as well. So pragmatism's number one. I think flexibility as well. I like to think strategic. Here's the thing: I've spoken on quite a few leadership training programs over the years. And one of the refrains I've heard frequently is when people are seeking to go up, the advice they're getting is you've got to be strategic. Stop being operational. You've got to be strategic. Worst advice ever, in my opinion. You have to do both. You should never stop being operational, because if you stop being operational, you don't understand the place. The operational is how you implement strategy. This notion that you can divide the two and senior executives should only be strategic, it's a fallacy. But those kind of myths still go around the sector. I still hear that far too often, I think. So it is that balancing. You have to be able to think strategically, but you have to get down on the ground. I'm doing another round of these back to the floor meetings at the moment, and that's where the learning is. Because I've done 18 years as an academic. I understand research. I understand teaching and learning, leadership, finance. What I realised I didn't really understand as I was approaching this job is the nuts and bolts. What are the concerns of registry or our IT service desk? What's the reality on the ground? Because if you lose touch with that, you don't know how to move things forward, because you're never thinking about the impacts. And now, because of the result of these meetings, every time we're going to make a decision, I can think about the real impact on colleagues at the end of the process, at the end of those decisions. So I think it's moving between the strategic and the operational constantly.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So, I mean, I really like that, and I like the close listening to the different, boots on the ground areas of the work, because that's how you find out what's really happening. And I can see you doing that, and I see you doing it in your LinkedIn posts as well. Where you're very clear about what your aspirations for how leadership should be. Do you demand the same of your your leadership team? I mean, do they have to in some way lead in the same way?
In a similar, I think the values have to be the same. What we
I
want
see.
to achieve has to be the same. They're all very different characters and all experts in their own right. Um,
Yeah.
but and I say this a lot of times, it's the best team I've ever worked with. They bring their own individual expertise, but there's a challenge I've never had that is quite rare on exec teams. Often there is, you don't really, if you don't agree with the VC, I mean, I've disagreed with lots of VCs, and colleagues will come up to me afterwards and say, "Oh, that's career limiting. You really shouldn't say that." Or, VCs they only want good news. Don't tell them the problem. It's ridiculous. So we have a high challenge. We challenge each other. People challenge
Yeah.
me. We change our minds. We talk about our mistakes, where we got things wrong. We thinking strategically is like a collective activity with us. It's not about I go away and think, oh, what should the strategy be? What should we do here? It's a collective, and we build on each other, and it gets refined, it gets challenged, it gets torn down sometimes. Sometimes we just say, no, it's not going to work, and we
Yeah.
stop doing things. We're not going to see things through just because we thought at one point it was a good idea. So getting that balance, I think, is really important. I'm going to make mistakes, of course, but I talk
Mm.
about them. It's good to acknowledge that we're going to fail and fail productively. As long as we learn from it, that's the important thing. So
Yeah.
building, yeah. So the value is the same. I think there's a pace that has to be the same as well. We move quick. We don't rely on endless committees, endless working parties where things just get kicked down. If there are things to be done, we plan it properly, we discuss it properly, and we move quickly. So yeah, values, pace, um,
Mm.
a similar sense of developing people as well. Universities, we're great at focusing on students. Every university says that, but staff sometimes don't get the same kind of focus. I've said it lots of times. We're organisations of learning, but we're not necessarily learning organisations. We don't
Mm.
do that collective thinking throughout the organisation.
Yeah. Right. So, so I've heard two really interesting things there that I think lots of universities, in fact, lots of organisations would, give their eye teeth for. One is rigorous challenge in their exec team, and the other is some kind of collective, yeah, buy-in and shared thinking. But let's just go. How did you go about building that capacity for good quality challenge in the exec? I mean, I guess you didn't choose this exec team, did you? Because you've not been there
No,
long enough to have done
no,
the whole thing.
I've largely chosen them all. I
Oh, have
think
you? Oh, right.
there was only two members of the previous exec team that were still on there. The rest
Right.
were new to the exec team. Yeah,
Okay. So how quickly did you do that?
pretty quick. We went for most of them. They were internal applicants.
Right. Yeah.
Because we had some good people, and yes, you should test the market in certain jobs, but we've also tested the market and not recruited because we haven't found the people who are right for us, and what we want to achieve. Um, so we had to. I'd rather not recruit if I'm not sure about someone or there's enough doubt there. It's better to not recruit. So we've done that in the past where we haven't recruited senior posts. We thought, well, what talent do we have internally? How can we change roles and approaches? How can we develop people into roles rather than just relying on people who've done it? Problem is, we're very, very clear. We want to do things differently as a university. We want to lead differently. We want to behave differently as an executive. That's not easy to find externally. Whereas people who have grown up in it, and we're developing, and people who are ambitious and hungry to change things, those are the people to develop. So I'd rather develop people who are perhaps not quite experienced enough than go externally and bring the same old ideas in.
Yeah. So so if I walked in and I could feel the difference that you're trying to make in BNU, I mean, what would be the difference I could feel?
I think it's just kind of pace and rigor. Our exec team meet. I mean, I've been on lots of exec meetings where there's just trivia on it. You just think, why are we sitting there wasting? We should have empowered someone to make a decision about this before it gets to us. Because there's a kind of paternalism in a lot of university execs, where people in the organisation can't make a decision without getting the say so of someone on the exec. It's just wrong. You can't run an organisation like that. You can't run a learning organisation like that. So we empower
Yeah.
people to make decisions. So the first few exec meetings, people were still in the old way of doing things, and they'd send through things for approval, and I'd just phone them up and say, "Look, make a decision. You know your business better than we do. This is your area. Make a decision. Do what's the right thing, and we'll support you."
Mm.
So I think there's that. So everything that comes to exec, everything we talk about, is going to move us forward in some way. And then we share. So after every exec meeting, we share notes of the meetings to all colleagues, so they know what we're talking about. They know why we're making decisions. Um, People spend so much of their lives in work and give so much to education work that they need to be treated like adults. This is what we're
Yeah.
talking about. You're not going to like some things. You are going to like others. So yeah. So I think there is that. There's I think that proximity is really important, and that's noticeable when you come in. If I can be walking around just having a chat with people, and they say, "Oh, look, I had an idea." Any level, not necessarily management.
Yeah.
What do you think of this? And we'll say, interesting. Come along, we'll talk about it. Ideas and innovation are emergent at B&U now. We're not completely there, but we're motoring towards it.
Yeah. Yeah. Just so I know what that means. Yeah, I mean, when I hear emergent, I'm thinking like Henry Mintzberg's emergent strategy. It means a lot of the strategy bubbles up from the team. How do you make sure you hear it?
Um, it's getting easier. I mean, it was a bit of a cultural change when I started, I think. And colleagues
Yeah.
we still go. One of the few things I dislike about being an exec is the amount of layers before things get to you. So I encourage
Yeah.
colleagues to just email me straight now. They're not going to go through the formalities and the process and the committees, etc. They just send me an email saying, "Look, I had this idea. What do you think?" We take it from
Mm.
there. And the more you do that, as particularly as a vice chancellor, the more people hear about it, the more people feel empowered to do it. So it's a gradual thing, I think. You start by modelling it, you start being very open about it, and then people get into the swing of it, and it just becomes part of the culture.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm. And the other thing you said that was really important um, was about genuinely creating a learning organization. You said because places are learning, but often not places that are great at doing the learning themselves. And I heard loud and clear you're trying to bring that about. Um, so what does that involve?
There's a number of strands to it. If I'll give you one of the new ones we're starting, so we've brought in. I called them industry sabbaticals when I had the idea, but colleagues didn't like that particularly, so they've changed the name. So we do knowledge exchange programs now. So any
Ah,
member of staff, professional services, academic, any level can request up to 4 weeks working in another organisation, and learning from them and bringing back new ideas. And then we say, well, okay, this is great. How do we disseminate that? How can we turn that into development opportunities? How can we embed that within our practices? That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. If we want new ideas, we have to spend time in new places. The university sectors, it's so closed sometimes. And I've worked in places where you say, okay, well, what's the other university doing? Forget what they're doing. What's Apple doing? What's Google doing? You know what I mean? What's the top restaurant doing? Let's learn from different types of practice, different types of organisations. That's what we really want to embed. Other than that, we've got these thinking groups as well. So before we create any strategy or detailed plan, rather than spending a year writing it and then going out for a kind of lip service consultation, we'll go with ideas. So there's the three groups. We've got a group of students, group of frontline staff, and then the university management group. And we just go along with ideas and say, look, we've heard this feedback, thinking about doing this, what do you think? Now, sometimes it's a no, that's just not going to work, and they will talk me through the problems of implementation, so just scrap it. But then it saved us all the work of developing something that's just not practical. Other times it gets refined. There's a spark there. We start thinking it through as an organisation, and I think that's the approach we want to take to everything. We're not going to just do the work and say, "Here's a 120-page plan. What do you think?" and then not change
yeah,
anything. We start with people.
yeah. It's really, I mean, it's really refreshing, and I'm not surprised to hear it because you've aired a lot of this approach in your writing. But how does this sit, for example, with governance, with the is it a council that you have?
Yeah.
I mean, because this kind of pragmatism could easily the governance structure could say, well, we're not seeing all the papers we used to see. How do we know what's going on? I mean, how are you managing that?
We, we've got a situation. I mean, frankly, with council, I was very clear when I went for the job that, I'll operate with absolute transparency.
Yeah.
Um, People talk about transparency a lot in the sector around governance. It's not always there, and we know that. And certainly governors of universities know when there isn't full transparency. So we got to a stage where we actually provide more detail than council have ever had, and sometimes
Oh,
it's too
okay.
much
Well,
detail. So it's not, but they are the end result. Council is, we've already done the work. We've spoken to colleagues, we've spoken to students, we've co-created, we've co-developed things. So by the time it gets to council, we can be very clear and succinct. So we've got to, and it's about finding that balance, between the amount of detail that they need to assure themselves, but also they're busy people, they can't be
yeah.
they're reading 600 pages of things. So we've slimmed down the committees as well. Universities have far too committees that don't achieve anything. So again, we've slimmed down. We're focusing on what's actually important for our governors, so they know the information they need, and if they, it's the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, did your exec team get smaller when you took over? Good.
No, it's got larger. There
It's got larger.
was,
Right.
yeah, there was 6 people before, 5, 6 people. Now there's 9, 10
Okay.
including.
All right.
And I think
Yeah. So,
there were some voices that we needed to be on that exec team that weren't there.
right.
Didn't have a HR director on there, for example. Didn't have the chief information officer on there. So we've now got all the voices that we need, so that when we're talking about everything's pretty much cross-institutional, but we can get those voices, we can understand how things are going to play out in different areas of the organisation. So it's probably larger than a lot of exec teams, but, there are the voices we need to be heard there.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah. And I've also heard you loud and clear talking about making sure that the, the disappeared voices get heard. You
Yeah.
know. You know. And I tell you one of the things I loved about what you do, and it's not necessarily the vice chancellor role. I think you probably did it before. Is this forum you run for working class leaders in? Is it in HE or all across HE and FE?
No, just
But
HE for that. Yeah.
HE, yeah, and I came to one recently, and I thought it was a cracking good meeting because I'm from a mining family myself, and it's um, um, nobody would ever thought I'd have ended up in HE at all. And I guess to some extent, it probably the same for you in some ways. And you used the term that I thought was really interesting when you were describing how you feel about class now. You described yourself as liminal on that call.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's uh, of either fitting in nowhere or fitting in everywhere, one or the other. Yeah,
Yeah, it's that kind of middle space, and I think it's changed over the years. When I first went to university, like I said, that wasn't liminal. That was just not belonging. I didn't feel as though I belonged. The colleagues, other students would come in after the summer and say, "Oh, we've just been in the Caribbean or been, I don't know, wherever it happens to be, somewhere exotic." And I've been loading lorries all summer, and I just had nothing in common. And so when I entered HE as an academic, you know, you kind of see the same thing. I remember my
yeah,
first university conference. Now, I don't like university conferences. I've never really liked them. There's some good ones around, but a lot of them, they're just very cliquey. There's lots of people grandstanding. It's just not for me. And so I was at the first conference dinner, and they were talking about, just come back from skiing and I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, I can barely pay my rent. I'm living in London. I'm worried, I'm living on £10 a week for food. It was just a completely different experience. Then there was, there's the accentism and, the comments over the years about my accent, which hasn't changed since I was young. So I'd been out for dinner with a few colleagues in other universities, and we're sitting around saying, we're actually all from working class backgrounds. and it was a rarity. So I just, as I do, I just vocalised it on social media, and got a really good response. So I thought, well, there's, there might be something here. So I put it out. Let's just have a meet up, get together. If you're from a working class background, you're now a leader in HE, just come along, let's have a chat. I thought we'd get about 20 people. There was actually 300 turned up, just over 300 on the first one. And I thought, I should have been a bit more organised, I think, because I wasn't prepared for that. And I'm going to restart it because it's gone into abeyance a bit with what I've been getting up to speed on this job. And there's something, the stories that we've heard are just, they're phenomenal. I mean, inspiring, but also, sad in some ways. That idea, particularly around take something like accent. A lot of colleagues have come up to me, on those sessions and others, talking about how they've felt pressure to change their accent as they've gone into university, and particularly if they want to progress, the kind of exclusion from certain networks. I mean, classism's still a thing in university. And when I set it up, I mean, this is how I really knew. I had a couple of messages that are saying, "Oh, you don't want to be talking about class in universities." It was as though there's some kind of shadowy middle class cabal, that's just going to bring me down. I mean, it's hyperbole, but there are still a lot of undercurrents around class. And when you're thinking, intersectionally around how class interacts with race, gender, disability, for example, then you can really start seeing it. So yeah, it's been a really interesting process and group.
Yeah. So, Damien, I'm conscious that we're at 30 minutes already, and we could probably talk for ages, but I would like to make sure that we do a little bit about the future of the sector. And as you're looking at universities, I mean, there's obviously, everybody knows, a load of pressure on universities on all kinds of fronts. As you look forward, say, 5 years from now, I mean, what what kind of keeps you going, and what are you aspiring towards?
What keeps me going is I'm just stubborn, that's got me to a large extent to where I am now. I'm just stubborn, So there'll be challenges. There's always challenges. I'm not sure there ever was a golden age of HE that people talk about. There's always been challenges. There's always been change. There's always been a political football that's been kicked around. In 5 years' time, I don't know. I wouldn't profess to guess. I mean, we could have a very different government from a very different political persuasion. So it's like we're looking at a new strategy at the moment. So I've been reading a lot of other universities, and universities are saying, whatever their name is, 2035. No one has any idea. If you went back 5 years and looked at where we are now, no one would have thought it. So I think for me, my main concern is making sure BNU is prepared to deal with whatever comes. We can't. Long-term strategy is great, but we're not in a stable sector. We don't know. I mean, the white paper that's coming out sometime after the summer break, you can guess what's in it, but that could fundamentally change HE, or perhaps worse, it won't fundamentally change HE, and we'll kind of keep limping on and being tweaks until the next government comes in, who may have a complete disregard for the sector. So for me, I'm not worried about any grand statements about where we'll be in 10 years. I just want the university to be prepared for whatever comes. That's my main priority.
Yeah. And I'm hearing part of that preparedness comes in being a learning organisation, being able to respond pragmatically and with purpose to whatever's there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're really
I
clear.
think when we get to 5 years' time, I think it will be embedded. I'm hoping it will be embedded in the culture of BNU, so that we won't need to do it formally. It will just be automatic. Whatever, if there's an external change, internal change, people just respond. They learn from it. They co-plan how to deal with it. So when it becomes cultural, then I think we'll have done a decent job.
Yeah. So, I mean, final couple of things. I mean, I'm quite interested in how people become the leaders that they are. And you've said something about your background, but what are your kind of inspirations and influences, I suppose, that really have contributed to making you who you are?
God, there's been one. So Ruth Silver, who was the principal of Lewisham College when I started there, most inspirational leader I've ever worked for. You know,
Ah,
she wasn't universally popular. She was, I mean, she was a strong personality, but just a superb leader, and always talked about the future, being future proofing the organisation, future proofing yourself. And she was a personal support to me. So she was best leader I've ever worked with by miles. I think
yeah.
the other inspirations have been kind of negative inspirations from leaders I've worked with
Ah,
who have been ineffective or worse, toxic. I've probably learned more from bad leadership than I have from good leadership, because you know
yeah.
what not to do. And it was, as I've been moving up and I've worked for different people, it's been some good people, don't get me wrong, but the worst ones
Brilliant.
I've worked with, you just think, this is what we need to overcome. These are the
Yeah.
negative cultures that we need to overcome. We need to change things. So, I've been inspired by good and bad leadership, but never underestimate the learning from bad leadership.
Yeah. Mm, yeah. And just thinking about my people on TMP now or on TMP 2 or 3 years from now, um, what advice would you give to, I don't know, somebody who's say a dean or maybe early years as a PVC, thinking about, or the professional service equivalent, of course, head of a finance role, and they wanted to move into the exec level, they wanted to become perhaps a VC. What would you be saying to them?
Learn about the organisation properly. I know I've said it a couple of times, but get back to the floor, learn how the organisation works, learn the nuts and bolts. The rest you can get developed, and the more experienced you become, you will learn, you will become a better leader, hopefully. Surround yourself with the right people. I think that's essential. If you're not part of an existing network, build one. And social media is great for that. I mean, I've learned more from people on social media, I think, than I have from people I've worked with, because they're so diverse. I've linked with people from very different organisations who, we've communicated, and I follow lots of different types of people. So keep learning, surround yourself with the right people, but learn the nuts and bolts of the place.
Yeah.
Because too few executives do. They don't understand how universities work. They just, it's not stripping it back and looking at the gears and the mechanics and the people who are driving forward day-to-day student experiences. Those are the people you need to learn from.
Mm. Brilliant. Well,
That, and don't
Damien,
use
well,
AI for your job application.
yeah. Mm. Actually, that's a good final thing to focus on. Is, I mean, how are you thinking about how the role AI plays in the future of BNU and of your leadership team? I mean, how do you even start
Yeah.
thinking about it?
Again, be pragmatic about it. If it's a tool that can save you time doing mundane activities, use it. We're not rushing into full. I know some universities are spending millions on investing about how it can transform. Fundamentally, for me and the type of university we are and the type of students we support, we're a human business. The
Yeah.
personal is what makes us different. So, yes, students will interact with chatbots in every external organisation, and yes, there are some utility in a university. It's not going to replace the personal. The personal is what makes education so special. So we're doing it in a measured way. I think that's the best approach. If we can take the routine and the mundanity out of some of the work, great. But we're not looking at huge transformation.
Mm. Yeah. That's the pragmatism again coming to
Yeah.
the fore. Yeah. All right, Damien, there's so much more we could talk about. We're just about at 40 minutes. So give me a second to close off the episode, and then I'll come back and say a final thank you to you. Folks, I'm delighted that you've been able to listen or watch this one. Um, there's loads of links into the rest of the series, and as you'll know, there are interviews with leaders from all kinds of sectors, including the university sector. So do take a dive into some of the other ones. Meanwhile, Damien Page, I mean, thank you for taking your time so early into your, few months into your tenure. It's been brilliant to spend a bit of time with you, and I wish you well for everything that's still to come.
Right. Thanks, Chris. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Wonderful. See you soon. Bye bye.
See you.